opinions expressed in this show belong to the person expressing them. They do not purport to reflect the opinions or views of Rancher or any other entity.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whoever's watching this, wherever you're watching this. This is episode 3 of what we're calling Shipwreck's Sunken Treasures, which is also a mouthful and difficult to say in the morning. Cool. Sorry about that, guys. But as you can see, the format's changed a little bit. You can see that I am running Windows down here on the bottom screen. So ignore anything that you see there. I also have up here the Discord chat so that I can keep track of everything. I've actually got Discord open there on the OBS, on my phone as a prompter, and in other places. So if I don't see it, it's my own fault. Beyond that, I'm excited. Thank you, Nuno. I'm excited to talk about Cuvela and what I've done this week. I shared a link in the Discord channel to the repo that I've stored all of the stuff I worked on. And the way that this episode I think is going to go, I didn't script it or anything. I'm going to go over some of the basics of Cuvela in case anybody missed the episode where Adrian introduced it. Then talk about some of the installation instructions I did, and then maybe go through the basic example. Cool. So Cuvela, I was really excited about this. I wouldn't say, well, Adrian's definitely got the operations side of the house nailed down, and I think I give a good foil to him in that I come from more of a application background with microservices and Istio and service mesh and all that jazz. And so Cuvela really stood out to me as having a lot of opportunity. And if we look at the docs, the main reason I say that is because it talks that it's a PaaS, but it's a PaaS without all of the rigidity that you often find in PaaS solutions. The TLDR here is that with a CLI, they have a Vela CLI that's really easy to install and play around with. They have a controller and a couple webhooks that get deployed on your cluster. And then everything is customizable and extensible through the native Kubernetes components. There are ways to extend it with CRDs. There are ways to extend it with QLang. There are ways to even make calls out to other services as you're going through things. And so strap in because it's going to be a hell of a ride. So if we actually go through, having access to the chat is slightly distracting, but I think it's going to be effective. So let's spin up. I have 4 tabs open. The first tab is that I stored everything in a Fleet repo. You don't have to be an expert of Fleet to go through what I'm going to go through. Just know that through the process of this installation, I've had to install some things beforehand. The first thing I did was I deployed monitoring so that I can make use of the monitoring components of Istio. Then I deployed Kiali. Kiali is going to be is a requirement for the Rancher deployment of Istio. Then I deployed Istio. And then the last dependency is that Cuvela is requiring Cert Manager. Cert Manager for its more of the serving and the Knative stuff. That stuff I didn't really dive into. I'll talk later about how we might talk about this again in another episode. There's a lot of content here that I just didn't get into because it's a huge system. And then once I did that, there are CRDs. Technically, you can install them with a Helm chart command, but I prefer to keep them separate. And then there's Cuvela, and then the action happens in Cuvela files. It might seem very, very simple, but by the end of installing all of this on a cluster, what you get is you have the ability to inject a sidecar automatically into a workload and then add virtual services to that workload. I'm working on making it so that the Istio project isn't basically you're still dealing with the rudimentary things that as a developer you care about, deployment, services, ports, images, maybe some mounts and stuff like that. But outside of that, you deploy a service. Cuvela gives you the ability to make a platform such that you're automatically getting service mesh functionality. And so that's roughly what's going on. And I've already got a Cuvela cluster up. But the way that I have this set up, a little without going too much into Fleet, I have that repo pointed to within my Rancher environment. If we go to continuous delivery here, we can see that things have been modified. We have a Git repo. This Git repo, if I edit config, you can see that there's a repository URL that's pointing to the repository. It's going to install the Helm charts that are required for this project. It's pointing to the main branch. I'm just using the main branch because this is a proof of concept. And then these are all those paths that I mentioned before. So it'll independently deploy them and make sure that all of the components are being maintained in separate bundles. And then it's deploying to all the clusters in the workspace. So if we go back to the cluster, what happens is when I create any cluster in Rancher, it'll automatically get deployed. So I'm going to put Cuvela live demo. What could go wrong? Live demos have never failed before. We're going to keep everything the same. One conscious decision I'm making is I'm not using layer 4 load balancers or cloud provider information, so you'll see there's a none there. So I'm going to click create there. And we'll see later on that Cuvela is set up and everything works the way we want it to. But that's enough about the structure and the setup. I don't want to spend too much time there. I want to talk about all the juicy bits of Cuvela. So the process of installing is there's the CLI first, and then you have to add it to the cluster. I think I found the repo itself a little bit more valuable, so we'll cut over to there. In the repo, you can see the basic image, the quick start. I think all I did was go straight directly to the charts Cuvela core. And looked over the values to find out basically what's being deployed with this chart, ingress service, your standard stuff, resource usage, certificates, and issuers. And I deployed things in the standard way. Let's just double check that I can find where they tell you to deploy it with Helm. There we go. So it's just a Helm repo add command pointing to their registry. Helm repo update. Oh, thank you, Tim. What's your take on Cuvela's relation to OAM.dev? I think it's going to, I don't know if it's going to grow into a full-fledged like foundation or anything like that, but I think the project has legs. It's still definitely in the early stages, and there are some rough edges with the Cuvela product and maybe some of the spec, but I think it's promising. CNAB is, I'm not going to cast shade on any other project. I found this one, hopefully if you dig around with this one, you'll find that there's differences in where it lies. One of the things that I found out playing around with Cuvela is that it kind of bumps up against the OPA gatekeeper space and against the policy space, as well as the application development space. So it's got a wider grasp. But once we've installed that, let's get to actual functionality. There are two ways that you can use it. There's with the platform builder and for the end user. The end user is basically, I want to deploy an image with X amount of replicas with X amount of traits. And then the platform builder is defining what your workload types are and what your traits are. So in the managing template section, you'll see that there are two sections. Workload type. Workload types is going to be an encapsulation around things such as CRDs or native Kubernetes resources. To show you the example I have in the repository, let's actually look at some of the resources that have been deployed in my cluster. Give that a second to load. We'll look at workload definitions. We'll see that there are 4 here. There's the three that come by default are task, web service, and worker. And you can see that they're using a naming convention, which is the kind and then the group that it belongs to. So if we look, for instance, at the worker type, that's going to be kind of garbled up. But the main idea here is that there's the group and the kind there, and then there's the template. The template is going to be where your first spot where you're able to inject QLang. QLang is going to give you the ability to do loops. It's going to give you the ability to do some validation, some regex. So you can. That's the first point of extensibility, and that's the first time where a light bulb went off in my head saying that this has potential. Beyond that, let's look at. I don't want to go over some of the nitty-gritty details. I did add for the example, this demo, I did add my own custom workload. If we go back, we'll see I added this one. Let's edit this one as YAML. And here you can see that I'm just piping in the standard deployment. That'll give me the ability to leverage the core Kubernetes component of deployment within certain parts of QLang, or of Cuvela. Then the buffering is. So if we look at the configuration that I have, just to prove that it does something, I've set up like I said, the workload definition and then a trait definition. The two that come default are ingress and scalar. 2 minute out of YouTube down. Is YouTube completely down? Or is it just, I didn't touch anything on YouTube. It might be Restream bot. You guys are still seeing the, on Twitch, we can still see everything, right? Wait, even the ads. Oh, it might be my internet problems. That's unfortunate. We'll give that a second. What I can do to fix that. YouTube is back. Restream bot is still working. Okay, good. Because I didn't really have any knobs that I could turn. I don't have my network set up. Feed is slowly failing. Of course. Well, that's great. I'm going to keep going and hopefully it comes back. This is being recorded on my local machine. So I'll edit it with Adrian and I'll just post a link so it won't be live. So I apologize. I'll get my network stuff figured out here shortly. I guess that's the best I can offer. Let me just ask if we're still seeing problems. YouTube is back. Now YouTube is back. Okay, we're going to forge ahead and assume that things will stay stable, at least for the purposes of the show. Still dark here. But with Cuvela, looking at the inject sidecar workload trait, basically the main idea, and let me actually bring that up in the YAML. This is a trait definition. So what a trait is, it's kind of like a decorator for Kubernetes resources. You define your app manifest or your application type, and then you apply a trait to it. And a trait is, this is the second point where the light bulb really went off in my head. And I felt like there was a huge amount of potential. I spent, I think, 2 solid days playing around with traits and what traits can do. This one's really simple. This is just using QLang to patch a resource that we give to any workload. And what this is doing, if you're familiar with Istio, Istio uses label systems to inject sidecars. And you can see here sidecar.istio.io inject equals true. So when I apply this trait, regardless of whatever namespace configuration I have, the mutating webhook in thanks for the feedback, Mac. The mutating webhook is going to automatically inject things into whichever namespace, whichever pod, wherever it's running. So if we close this and we look at application, part 2 is the actual application. This is just a dummy application. It's just called my web. It's of type worker. So that means it has the ability to release a deployment and I believe a service. It's got some flags configurable. There's an image, busybox, there's a command, and then you can see here that I've added the trait with the name, inject sidecar, and properties. So if we close that, I'm going to kubectl get applications. Hopefully my cluster is still responding. Yeah, my network might just be borked. Let's go into Rancher and view it that way. So in this product, you can see that there's the my web, and you can see that it's running with 3 containers. Let's get rid of that entirely and prove that it works. Actually, what I can do, and this is another live demo, this might fail, a warning, but I have the other environment, Cuvela live demo. If I do a update my kubeconfig, that'll pull down everything that I have tied to Rancher, kubectx. Let's go Cuvela live demo, kubectl get pods A, just to check that everything got deployed successfully. Got a lot of things running. We can see that Vela system is running. Vela system is the same naming convention that they use with like Istio system, Cube system. That's just where it has to be right now. We can see that monitoring's been deployed, everything's running. I don't see any issues there. Oops. And then let's just double check the continuous delivery operator here. Looks like everything in this cluster Cuvela live demo is green and ready to go. 2 have been modified. That's just something that happens after when Fleet deploys something, it checks in to see if the Helm chart has been modified based on what the Helm templating system does, and it just reports that it's been modified. But everything's up and alive. So now if I clear this, kubectl apply f inject sidecar trait, we see the cube sidecar trait injected, and then let's look at application.yaml. I'm actually going to remove this trait for now. Apply application. And then if we go back into Rancher, let's go into the cluster manager. Go here. I need to add, it's in the default namespace, so I don't need to add anything. We should see my web, but because we don't have the trait, we should see that it doesn't have any sidecars. So just to prove that out, we have my web, we have it running. I believe it's just running just sleep 1000, and it's only running the 1 container. Now, if we go back here and we look at the application, one thing I do want to show before I do that, those of you who are familiar with Istio, you'll see if we look, actually let's look at it here. Sorry about switching back and forth, guys. kubectl get namespace default out YAML. We'll see that we don't have any labels. There are some annotations. Those are just Rancher annotations. The labels, there's no inject label here. Clear that up. And then double checking application. Inject sidecar is good. kubectl apply application. If that ever gets through, then we should have a demo. We go back to Cuvela live demo. Go back here, and now we can see that it's been redeployed with the three different with the init container and the sidecar container. And then if we view edit YAML, we can see that there's, where's the label? Labels sidecar istio inject equals true. And so that kind of blew my mind. Well, it took a little bit of work, and then my mind was blown. I had to do some changes for the Istio injection webhook, and that's all encapsulated in the repo if you want to run this on your own. But the potential here is that I can add traits on top of that, say, hey, I want a destination rule applied to this, or hey, I want this to be part of an application that has virtual service routing with circuit breaking and retries and et cetera, et cetera. And I can spend all the time as an operator of the Istio platform and deploy this, but oh, I lost. I can deploy all this, and then my application developer never really needs to know anything about Istio. But if they want to, it's all there in front of them. It's all defined in Kubernetes resources and components like that. YouTube is breaking again. Well, that's unfortunate. I figured out the platform, and the platform broke on me. Ugh. All right, well then, I guess since it's 7 minutes to and YouTube's going to be struggling for a while, I'm going to have to kind of wrap things up. The last thing I want to mention though, just for the posterity and for the recording here later, and maybe a follow-up article that I write apologizing for all of the internet problems, is going to be that within these QLang components, the nice thing is that in the trait, for example, you have the ability to not only patch, but also patch in a sorted way the arrays, which is something specific to Cuvela. You also have the ability to run something called the processing element. And that's going to be able to allow you to call HTTP requests, which was the last point where I was really impressed. But since nobody can see me and I'm kind of talking to dead air, I'm probably going to wrap it up early. But one thing I do want to add for anybody that's watching, every week I'm going to update a community poll to tell you about other tools that I might be working on that you might want to see. In today's poll is going to be a continuation of last week's poll, but added some new things. You always have the opportunity to add something that you want to see down at the bottom in the comment section. But today, for next week, I can either do more with Cuvela. I might do another rehash of Cuvela since my YouTube stream broke the entire time. Again, apologies for that. And then also there's node feature discovery with maximize GeoIP. That was the supercluster thing I referenced last time. I want the ability to identify where a node in my cluster would be based on the GeoIP maximize database, and node feature discovery allows me to do that. Running your own Nixery outside of Google. Nixery is a registry that uses Nix packages and builds the image on the fly. It's mind-blowing. Look at it. I want to make it so that people can run this outside of the connections to Google, Google Storage, et cetera, et cetera. There's contributing to Uptime Robot, contributing to the Uptime Robot operator. That was a tool of the day this week to allow you to monitor components. I probably should do an Uptime Robot on the stream to find out whether or not things are breaking. Then there's using auras, since Docker release distribution as their Docker Hub registry. Let's break it. Let's throw all sorts of artifact stores that we want into it. And like I said, if you want to add anything to it, feel free to. Other than that, I guess the promise I'll make is that I'll figure out my network and YouTube and Restream bot with the help of Adrian for next time show. But I think that, let me know how the new format works. I like having things on one screen and not having to worry about moving back and forth. I figured out my audio problems eventually. Ian just made a comment, don't mention Docker, it breaks the feed. Docker makes things angry. I will follow up with this in the, well, I've got 4 more minutes. Let me keep going. Back into the Cuvela traits. Reasons that I'm excited about Cuvela, things that I think have the ability to add, that I have the ability to add onto, are there's also a dashboard. If we run Vela dashboard, it's going to deploy the dashboard and forward it to your local host. It's 38081. If we look here, localhost 38081. This is where you get the idea of what it looks like from an application developer standpoint. So if I can see my applications here, application sample, that application sample UI does have issues. I don't know if this is my issue or their issue. I appreciate that comment, Nuno. You create applications. This is where you're codifying what's being exposed to the application developer. So for instance, if I wanted to just expose the trait, sidecar inject, as opposed to having the user having to know what the label is. I know personally, even though it's really straightforward and it's only like 30 characters of a string to memorize, I always forget what the exact label for injecting into Istio is. This solves that problem for me anyways. And if we want to look at the scalar, you can see that the way that it's exposed, it's 1. I could set it to 4. And then if I look at the workers, you can see the various components that you can add to it as workers. I didn't dive into too much of the capability today, or the traits or the workloads from a design perspective. One of the other things that I really enjoyed about Cuvela is that everything is using OpenAPI behind the scenes for their Kubernetes resources. And what that means is that if I do a kubectl explain on workload, give that a second to auto-complete. Yeah, it's got to be my network connection, because normally my Kubernetes clusters don't take that long to load. But if I do a kubectl explain, the workload definitions, all of the fields are annotated. So I at least have an idea of what needs to go where. So the workload definition.spec.template, you can see that's the description of the template, or if we want to do a template type, you can see here comment, and this is probably the comment I'll leave with, is that they're in the really early stages and they've got such grand visions that I want to keep track of this project, because right now it uses QLang specifically, but they're planning on extensions for Terraform HCL and Helm charts. So it's going to be an all encapsulating system to allow you to expose whatever type of manifest is bundled in there. It's going to be, I believe it's going to be a thing. I wouldn't stake my career on it, but I do believe that it's going to be a thing. All right, so that brings us to the hour. I want to apologize again for not having proper internet. I want to apologize for the sound problems in the beginning. I guess I'll have to tweak my crisp settings so that the microphone is audible. Apparently, Crisp thought my own voice was noise. But be sure to vote on the poll. Be sure to don't thumbs up this because it was audio problems. Let me fix things and then thumbs it up. But definitely thumbs up the community. Adrian's been doing great work. With all that, thank you for your time. I look forward to doing this next week. Cheers, everybody. Have a great weekend.